Padre Pio always maintained that God's mercy extends further than human theology dares to imagine. Nowhere was this more evident than in his encounters with souls who had died by their own hand. People the Church once taught were automatically damned, buried in unconsecrated ground, mourned without hope. But Padre Pio, who saw what others could not, knew a different truth. He knew that God understands suffering in ways we never can, that mental anguish is as real as physical pain, and that the moment of deepest despair is not beyond the reach of divine mercy. It was a grey October morning in 1958 when Padre Pio encountered the soul of Marco Tessari, a young man of 23 who had taken his own life 3 days earlier. The monastery was quiet. The early Mass concluded, and Padre Pio had retreated to the chapel to pray for the dead as he did every morning. But this morning was different. This morning a presence manifested with such intensity of sorrow that Padre Pio physically felt the weight of it pressing against his chest. The young man appeared gradually, not walking into visibility, but slowly materializing, as if reluctant to be seen. His spiritual form reflected how he had looked in life. Thin, exhausted, with eyes that carried the particular emptiness of someone who had stopped hoping long before they stopped breathing. "Padre," the young man whispered, and his voice was raw with shame. "I shouldn't be here. I don't deserve to speak to you. I don't deserve anything." Padre Pio's heart broke at the words, because he had heard this shame before from other souls like Marco. The shame of having committed what the world called the unforgivable sin. The shame of having given up. The shame of having caused such pain to those left behind. "What is your name, son?" Padre Pio asked gently. "Marco. Marco Tessari, from Verona. I ended my life 3 days ago." He could barely say the words. "I know what that means. I know where I'm supposed to go. I just wanted to see you once before I have to face what I've done." Padre Pio stood slowly, approaching the young man's spirit with infinite tenderness. "Marco, before you tell me anything else, I need you to understand something. You are not damned. You are not beyond mercy, and God is not waiting to condemn you. Marco looked up, confusion and disbelief warring in his translucent features. But the Church teaches? The Church teaches that life is sacred, yes, that we are not the authors of our existence and therefore have no right to end it. This is true. Padre Pio's voice was firm but infinitely compassionate. But the Church also teaches that for a sin to be mortal, to truly sever the soul from God, it requires full knowledge and complete consent. And Marco, I need to ask you, when you made that final decision, when you took that action, were you truly free? Was your mind clear? Or were you trapped in a darkness so complete that you could no longer see any other way out? The question broke something open in Marco. He collapsed to his knees, or the spiritual equivalent, and the story poured out. He had been depressed for years, not sad, not melancholy, truly clinically depressed in a way that felt like drowning in black water with no surface in sight. It had started after his father's death, when Marco was 19. The grief had been normal at first, expected, but it never lifted. Weeks became months, became years, and the weight only grew heavier. He had tried to hide it, went through the motions of living, got a job, attended Mass, smiled when expected to smile, but inside he was dying by inches. Every morning was a battle to get out of bed. Every interaction required energy he didn't have. Every moment of every day, people told me to pray more. Marco said, his voice hollow. To offer it up, to trust in God. And I tried, Padre. I tried so hard. I prayed until I had no words left, but the darkness only grew thicker. And I started to believe that maybe I was being punished, that my depression was a sign of weak faith, that if I were truly faithful, truly holy, I wouldn't feel this way. Padre Pio closed his eyes, grief washing over him, because he had heard this before too. The terrible lie that depression is a spiritual failing, that mental illness indicates weak faith, that suffering of the mind is somehow less real, less valid, less deserving of compassion than suffering of the body. Did you seek help? He asked quietly. I tried. I went to my parish priest. He told me to say more rosaries. I went to a doctor once, but my mother said, medication was for weak people, that I just needed to trust God more. I went to confession and confessed my despair as if it were a sin, and the priest gave me penance and told me to have more faith. Marco's voice cracked. Everyone treated my suffering like it was something I could just decide to stop feeling, like I was choosing to be miserable, like I was being self-indulgent. But you weren't choosing it. No. God, no. I would have given anything to feel normal again, to wake up without that crushing weight on my chest, to look at the world and see something other than gray emptiness. I didn't want to die, Padre. I just wanted the pain to stop, and eventually the pain became so unbearable that death seemed like the only way to make it end. Marco described his final night. He had written letters to his mother, his sister, trying to explain what he himself didn't fully understand, trying to make them see that this wasn't their fault, wasn't anyone's fault, that he loved them but couldn't carry the weight anymore, that he was sorry, so desperately sorry. And then I did it. And in that moment, there was relief. Finally, it would be over. But then he looked up at Padre Pio with anguished eyes. Then I realized what I'd done and the horror of it. Not just dying, but what I was leaving behind. My mother finding me, my sister's grief, the pain I was causing by trying to end my own pain. It all came crashing down, and I wanted to take it back, wanted to undo it. But it was too late. What happened next? Padre Pio asked softly. I stood up, saw my body, realized I was separate from it, and I waited for the demons to come, for hell to open up and drag me down, because that's what's supposed to happen to suicides, isn't it? That's what everyone always said. But the demons didn't come. No. Marco's voice was filled with wonder and confusion. Instead, there was light, not bright or harsh, just gentle, warm, and a presence. I couldn't see anyone, but I felt accompanied, like someone was standing with me, waiting for me to be ready. An angel, Padre Pio said. How can that be? I committed a mortal sin. I took the life God gave me. I should be. Marco. Padre Pio's interruption was gentle but firm. Listen to me carefully. What you experienced in those final months and years was not a moral failing. It was an illness, a disease of the mind, as real and as devastating as cancer of the body. Would we condemn someone for dying of cancer? Would we say they lacked faith because they couldn't will their tumor away? No. And yet we do this with mental illness. We treat it as weakness rather than sickness. He continued, the Church's teaching on suicide must be understood in its fullness. Yes, taking one's own life is objectively wrong. It is a rejection of God's gift. But subjectively, the person's culpability depends on their mental state. Were they truly free when they made that choice? Or was their judgment so impaired by illness, by unbearable suffering, by chemical imbalances in their brain that they could no longer think clearly? God judges the heart, Marco, not just the action. He sees the years of suffering you endured, the battle you fought every single day just to exist, the times you wanted to give up but forced yourself to keep going, the prayers you whispered even when you felt unheard, the love you tried to maintain even through the darkness. He sees all of it, and he understands that you didn't choose death because you rejected him. You chose death because... Please, God, his mother was whispering, please have mercy on my son. Please don't let him be lost. He was suffering so much. I didn't understand how much. I thought he just needed to try harder. I said the wrong things. I failed him. But please, please don't punish him for my failures. If anyone should be punished, it's me for not seeing... Stop! Marco cried out. Don't blame yourself. It wasn't your fault. She can't hear you, Padre Pio said gently. But God hears her prayers. And Marco, those prayers matter. Every rosary she prays for your soul, every mass she attends in your name, every tear she sheds while begging for your salvation, these are not wasted, because you are not in hell. You are in God's hands, and He is determining where you go from here. The scene shifted again. Now they stood in what Padre Pio understood to be a threshold, a place between earth and eternity, where judgment occurs. But this was not the harsh tribunal Marco had feared. Instead, it felt like mercy taking form. The presence of God manifested, not as judge, but as the divine physician. And Marco's life unfolded, not as a list of sins to be condemned, but as a medical history to be understood. God showed Marco his brain, not just spiritually, but physically. The chemical imbalances, the neurological patterns that made normal joy impossible, the genetic predisposition to depression he had inherited, the trauma his mind had endured and never properly processed, all the physical, biological realities that had made his suffering not a choice but an affliction. You were sick, my child, came the divine communication, not in words, but in understanding that bypassed language. And you fought that sickness with every ounce of strength you had. For years you battled, often alone, often misunderstood, often condemned by those who should have helped you. You held on far longer than most would have. You were not weak. You were extraordinarily strong. But eventually, even the strongest soldier falls when the wound is too deep and the help never comes. Marco saw his life through God's eyes. Yes, there were sins, moments of anger, of pride, of selfishness unrelated to his depression. These were real and would need to be addressed. But the final act, the decision to end his life, God showed him the truth. That choice was made by a mind no longer capable of choosing freely. It was not rebellion against God, but surrender to pain so overwhelming it had destroyed his capacity for rational thought. "Am I forgiven?" Marco whispered. "There is nothing to forgive for that final act," God showed him. "You were not culpable in the way you feared. But Marco, you do need healing. So much healing. Not punishment, but restoration. You need to understand your worth, something the depression stole from you. You need to release the shame you carry. You need to see yourself as I have always seen you, beloved, precious, worth fighting for. Purgatory? Yes, but not as torture, as recovery, as intensive care for a soul wounded by illness. You will learn to know yourself as you truly. He continued, if you are suffering from depression, from thoughts of ending your life, please hear me. What you are experiencing is real. It is not your fault. It is not a punishment from God. It is an illness, and like any illness, it deserves treatment, compassion, and help. Seek that help. Tell someone. Fight for your life with every resource available. medication, therapy, hospitalization if necessary. God does not want you to suffer alone. He does not want you to die. He wants you healed. And to those who have lost someone to suicide, your loved one is not automatically damned. God's mercy extends further than our understanding. Pray for them. Trust in God's compassion. And know that He judges the heart, not just the final action. What looks like rejection of life may have been in reality surrender to unbearable pain by a mind too broken to see any other way forward. God understands this, and He is merciful. Years later, a mother whose son had taken his own life came to Padre Pio in despair, convinced her child was in hell. Padre Pio took her hands in his stigmata-marked ones and said, God is not the monster you fear. He is the Father who understands suffering better than any human ever could. Trust Him with your son and pray, because prayer for the dead has power you cannot imagine. She asked, Is there hope? And Padre Pio, remembering Marco, replied with certainty, There is always hope. God's mercy is infinite, and He does not abandon those who suffer, even especially when their suffering becomes too much to bear. This is what Padre Pio witnessed, a message of hope for those who suffer in darkness and for those left behind by suicide. Mental illness is not a sin. Suffering is not weakness, and God's mercy reaches even into the deepest despair, catching those who fall and carrying them gently home.